Welcome to our third installment, Warhammer and Elaborate History. In the prior two videos, we discussed a few interstellar empires rising and falling. We discussed how mankind is taking to the stars and the difficulties that they faced for roughly 10,000 years. And now we are reaching the year 30,000. We also talked about the war, the significance of the war, and that's where we're going to start. Now, a big point on the warp, like a big note about it, is the warp influences reality and vice versa. All right, our thoughts go into the warp, and what happens there? Well, we discussed they become gods. Yes, we have the making of gods within each of us. Okay, and the gods have rivalry. All right, they want to fight over domain. Now, what happens during stalemate? What happens when Khorne can no longer go on rampage? What do you do? What do you do? You go to another battlefront. You go to reality. You start a battlefront there, because if you can influence hearts and minds in reality, that's how you send more thoughts into the warp to make you stronger, if that makes sense. A demon is a fragment of a god, okay? I think the gods can more or less divide themselves an infinite amount of times, but it matters how many times they make these divisions, okay? A fraction of a fraction of a fraction of omnipotence is still incredible, but there's different forms. There are greater and lesser demons. And mankind at this point has no knowledge of this. There's only, well, there are a few. There are a few, but the most notable amongst this is the Emperor. The Emperor, somehow, this is, I don't know, maybe it's a plot hole, but somehow he convinces everyone to have Geller fields and to use the warp as a route of transit, all right? Now, during the Great Crusade, they're going through and they're just murdering aliens. If it bleeds blue, they kill it. That reminds me of Sanguinius' tale. I don't want to forget that for later. And they don't know. Nobody knows, okay? The Primarchs are scattered throughout the stars, and one by one, they end up getting reunited with their legions. We're going to start with Lorgar. Lorgar, his father was Corfarian. If you remember one obscure name from anything that I've talked about, Corfarian is one of the biggest players in Warhammer 40,000, and he doesn't get a lot of credit. I think he's a character created by Dan Abnett, so they kind of just tacked him on as kind of an afterthought, but he has a whole bunch of lore behind him. Basically, Corfarian was some sort of religious zealot, and he went with Lorgar to hunt down all of these. They didn't know what they were worshiping, but they were worshiping something. And so, because the Emperor is what Lorgar worships, he destroys anyone that has another god. And so him and Corfarian go and basically convert or kill everyone within their planet. It's not an incredibly hard process, because Lorgar is more than capable of introducing very fiery sermons to get his people moving. And so they what do? They build a shrine to the Emperor. I don't know if this is on their home planet, but it's on the world of Monarchia, which is essentially the Tower of Babylon. The Emperor had a decree, which was to never have any worship allowed in his fully secular kingdom. I think that Lorgar was kind of pushing the boundary here and there, and the Emperor destroyed Monarchia. He left only one survivor who witnessed the entire thing. She was a whore, but through the stigmata of her becoming blinded by seeing the brilliant rays of light eradicating everyone she knew from life, she was blessed with visions, and so she becomes a seer. And between her radical visions and Corfarian's dirty tricks. See, he didn't kill all the cults. He left a couple here and there, and well, it goes really dark. It goes really dark really quickly. Lorgar meets a demon. This demon, I could really only remember her as being a hag, but he sends. She takes him to this edge of space, and things are just funny. There's something in the nothing. Okay, like space is nothing, and yet there's something else there in the nothingness. So they send a ship out. 20 seconds elapses for those aboard Lorgar ships, but the one ship that did go through the rift, its crew experienced a violent bout of metamorphosis that climaxed with all the space marines on board eating the human crew and then going into, I think, a sort of hibernation after there was nothing to eat or kill. And they ate each other, of course. But they became the Gal Borvak, which are essentially possessed marines. Probably just a little more badass. And so why does Lorgar do all this? He needs something to worship. He wanted something to worship. He absolutely needs to have the truth. He needs to have that behind him. That's Lorgar's story. Before we delve into the implications here, there's also good guy. I mean, there's more wholesome tales that happen. Corax or Corvus, I'm not sure which name is cooler. He's a slave on a mining world, and all the wealthy get to live on the world, and then the slaves have to live on the moon. And eventually they end up causing a revolt, a riot, and they end up overtaking the moon base, and they threaten everyone on the ground with launching the basically moon bombs at them. I mean, it was like mining cores and stuff like that. And it's not that hard to just whoosh, just like, you know, let it out the airlock and hope for the best, hope it lands on the ground. So Corax got him by the you know what, and that was a fun little tale. You should definitely check his books out. I think they're wholesome. Next we get to Horus. Horus was the Emperor's favorite son. Of course, there's a rivalry between him and Gilliman. But the Emperor can no longer stay at the front for some reason. Many seem to take this as a sign that he's abandoned the Great Crusade. Ask yourself why he would leave. Ask yourself why the Emperor would leave behind the most important one of his works, unless it isn't his most important work, unless there's another work at play here. And I think Horus became a little bit jaded by his position. I mean, at first, you know, there's jubilation, of course, of having the title War Master. But he is wounded, and it's very much a Khaleesi Khal Drogo situation where the magical seer comes forth and says, I can fix him, but he won't be the same. And what were they called? The Luna Wolves, or the Sons of Horus? They end up rushing out of a space shuttle with Horus's body. And I've heard this segment right here told so many times. They basically rushed through a crowd of people, killing them. Like, all these people came here to help Horus, and his Marines had none of it. These mortals were just in the way. So, this kind of all happens backstage. All this warp stuff is still like not really known. It's not the Galactic Civil War yet, really. In the interim, there's a guy called Magnus the Red. He's pretty cool. He's just a really smart guy. He dabbles with the warp. His entire chapter, they have these things they call familiars, and before things get really dark, it's kind of a cool kind of relation they have with the familiars. The familiars, they don't understand why, but they help them, give them powers. They don't understand where their powers are coming from, more or less. They understand there's a different dimension. But this is Ixnay. This is absolutely Ixnay. Something happened, or maybe just the other legions, such as the Death Guard, just got jealous. I know Mortarion at the Trial of Nicaea was just like, oh God, he didn't say God. There's nothing God, but no warp power. He said, yeah, no, I don't like the warp, using the warp power. He didn't look like this when he said that though. He looked very different. And there's a space. Okay, and this is why I guess I'm always on the side of Magnus. There's a Space Wolf Rune Priest there that just talks all this crap. I think he's running the trial. Just the legionary, basically. He says that the Space Wolf power comes from Fenris, and that Magnus's power comes from somewhere much more terrible. Maybe this is just something I missed out on in the lore, but because the Space Wolves do have like frost technology, it's like a special thing. But I'm fairly certain all magical power comes from the warp through some means of manipulation or another. So it's very hypocritical for this post-mortal to tell Magnus what to do. So they go back to their planet, and they're pretty pissed off. Everyone's like asking Magnus, like, "Are we gonna stop?" And he just shuts himself in his he just shuts himself in his tower, and he has a vision. He has quite a vision about the Imperium falling apart, and he goes to tell Daddy. Now, what's the quickest way? It's the quickest way to get there. Astral projection. How does he get to Terra? Well, he projects himself, and when he enters Terra, when he enters the catacombs where the Emperor is, he emerges as a creature from hell. He does not resemble himself. He's giant. He's burning. He's screaming, and he doesn't see it that way when he comes through. He's just trying to say, "Father, Father, watch out!" But all the Emperors, all the Emperor says is, "Hand me my hammer." And so Magnus realizes, actually, right after that he did wrong. He runs away and lets in a myriad of horrible demonic creatures through the portal that he came through. The portal that he came through was actually the Webway project. The Emperor went home to create the Webway, and it failed. It just absolutely failed. Magnus ruined everything. And probably the greatest battle of the Horus Heresy could have been fought beneath the halls of Terra this entire time. It's bad. It's really bad. The only ones that can really handle it are the Adeptus Mechanicus, who lobotomize their people so that they cannot become insane, and the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's chosen. While the Emperor made the legions that just be fragments of the Primarchs, the Custodes were each a fragment of the Emperor. They were each custom made. Like, instead of the Emperor making legions, he put all of that effort and creativity into these individuals. They're the only ones that can hold off the demons, and of course, then just barely. Horus understands that there's no such thing as an Imperium of Chaos. It's impossible. There's no way to organize chaos in a way that it isn't chaos. Chaos is chaos. That's an Imperium of Chaos is just an oxymoron or worse. And so he makes a pact with all the gods. They came to collect from the Emperor, and the Emperor denied them. And so they looked to collect to Horus. And Horus said, "Yeah, sure, yeah, why not? I'll do it." I don't care. He didn't care. He didn't care about any of them. And but he did care about winning. He did care about making the Imperium right. I'm not sure if he was going about it the right way, but he saw that all the Imperium was just a means for the Emperor to ascend to godhood. It was just a pedestal, if you will. And so, just as Horus was kind of upset about the Emperor quitting the Great Crusade, he was just as upset about the Emperor eventually leaving everyone. And that's more or less, I think, why he did it. Of course, there was manipulation there. And so, things are getting weird, okay? Things are getting really weird. They're, the Blood Angels, they were actually first approached by Khorne. Blood Angels, bada bing, bada boom. That's the whole deal, right? And there's an elaborate plot by Horus to get them with Khorne, and it's an amusing tale. It's really quite an amusing tale because the Blood Angels are fighting this Xenos race, and they're pretty cool. They enslave these people with these like bucket helmets, and the people with the bucket helmets like see all these like fantastic things, and they fight for them. And so it's a race of aliens that uses hallucinogenics to control its subjects. But there's something about like an addictive property of hallucinogenics that more or less makes it so people go to them willingly. And so the whole time Sanguinius is just trying to like Horus leads them over, Sanguinius is like, oh, this is just a mind trick. They see like a planet eat another planet, and they're like, that's fake or something. And it's pretty incredible. I like it because it's that incredulous trope from all horror movies where like the main characters, the kids are trying to tell the main characters there's a monster there, and the main characters are like, no, there's no such thing as monsters. And they get all of that, there's no such thing as monsters, out of the way in one book. And so Horus is manipulating that. Horus sent the Space Wolves Prospero to do the Emperor's bidding. And it's bad. It's really bad. The falling of Prospero is probably one of the greatest tragedies in all of 40k. They had beautiful temples filled with knowledge, just blown asunder. It was a paradise world. And Magnus is so wrought with shock as to what he's done. I mean, I've been there before. I've just been so racked with guilt that I've had to just been inert, immobile, until I gathered my wits. So I can understand. I can definitely understand almost why he wouldn't raise the alarms. He saw the Space Wolves coming, and he told himself, I deserve this. And so no one knew. No planetary fences were erected. The Space Wolves got to come right into orbit and start launching troops out into the streets without any sort of retaliation. Really, I mean, they had humans fighting Space Wolves. I'd rather just shoot myself. That would be terrifying. And during the conflagration, the librarians of the Thousand Suns, they just completely unleashed themselves against the enemy. One guy, he got like a serpentine form and just a bunch of hideous mutations as he was launching off all these like evil fireballs, and he saw his reflection in the broken glass, and then he begged the Space Wolves for death, which they gladly delivered. Eventually, Magnus gathers his wits. He and Leman Russ end up having a pretty climactic duel, and they end up running away to the planet of the Sorcerers, which is a nightmare world. It's a nightmare There's nothing good there. There's echoes of damnation over and over again. Of course, I don't know if I'll get to this anytime later, so now's the time to do it. The rate of mutation amongst the Thousand Sons was insane. They were just dabbling with dark magic left them warped, and so they attempted to do the rubric of Ahriman, and well, they lost their legion. They lost everyone. It more or less turned out to be the way the Necrontyr became the Necrons, because now most Thousand Sons are just automatons, suits of armor filled with dust, and that's the saying. That's how the saying goes. All is dust. All is dust. All is dust. As things are heating up, we're basically in the midst of galactic civil war. It was the Horus heresy. This period of time is very well cataloged. It's just quite a bit to get your head wrapped around all of it. I think the Primarch with the coolest story is Angron. The amount of creativity summoned for just his being is remarkable, just remarkable, and it really goes into decades of planning for this. I'm glad they did this after they developed the world eaters. I get word bearers and world eaters sometimes mixed up because I don't enunciate as well as I could. The world eaters, before they were founded, Angron was on this planet, and of course he too was a slave, and he had to fight in the gladiatorial pit. Okay, how do you break the cliche? How, in order to keep them fighting and give them a pretty good advantage, the overlords of whatever this nightmare world was called gave each of the gladiators the butcher's nails. It's a cranial implant. Where we've always been talking about taking stuff out of people's brains. They put something in his mind. The butcher's nails. When you sit idle, the needles will tick. When there's psychers around, the needles will tick. And it's basically meant to keep the fighter moving, keep the fighter constantly agitated. And it's like a box inside the brain. And connected to all the nerves in there are these tiny little tendrils. But the problem is they were never meant to be worn for an extended period of time. That's just, it's crazy. I mean, can you imagine something like that writhing in the back of your mind over and over again? So it comes out that during this Horus heresy, Angron is not long for this world. I mean, he was never stable, but now it's like sometimes he'll just grunt. It's incredible to have a Primarch that isn't really capable of commanding, because all he wants to do is just fight. And so his staff are just constantly trying to figure out like how to get him to the front line without him messing everything up. And it's great, but he's not long for this world. Morgar realizes this, and Morgar promises him salvation. The layman might imagine this would involve some sort of rigorous surgery, but let's think about Lorgar. Let's think about his affiliations. Let's think about what he's done, where he's been, and who his friends are. He commences a ritual, a blood ritual, as they storm the kingdom of Ultramar, and Angron is turned into a demon prince. This is a demon prince. This is Mortarian, and I really would beg of you never to call him Morty. You know, it's such a tragedy that Rick and Morty came out right around the same time this model was released. That name will live in infamy for me. But Angron becomes a demon Primarch. I think the demon Primarchs more or less are the ones that live the longest, and for the obvious reasons. It's hard not to live, and you can't die. And now we get to the Siege of Terra. Um, there were the drop site massacres of Istavan 5, and that's a notable battle, but it's really one of many. There's a lot of turncoats and colors shown. Check it out if you want to. I think that's a whole nother episode in itself. But we're going to go to the Siege of Terra. The traitors are doing pretty well for themselves. The Emperor's Children, a very, very ironic name for a legion not loyal to the Emperor. I always kind of grin. They take the irony. They really took the irony factor there. They were underneath Fulgar. Fulgar? Is that his name? Fulgar? I think. No, not Fulgrim. Emperor's Children Primark. I can't believe I forgot this. Fulgrim. No, not Fulgrim. Yeah, it is Fulgrim. Okay. I don't know why I didn't. Okay. So Fulgrim is perfect. I mean, as far as Legion can tell, he's perfect. He's an immaculate swordsman. He prides himself on martial prowess and form, and his whole Legion kind of just follows him. No one ever questions him because they all want to be like him. And I take a lot of real world examples when I look at Fulgrim. I see a lot of very, very, very huge connections here. Whenever there's one man in charge of everything, whenever there's no delegation, that's when things get really bad. When there's no checks, no balances, that's when things get really bad because there's no reason to be balanced. There's no reason to be checked if that's not there. And you can take whatever big name from history that got big for really bad reasons, and most of the time it's because A, no one knew how to tell them no, and B, they didn't know how to say no to their most radical followers, okay? And so you have radicals building radicals. Now, they go to this planet, and they just genocide the aliens there. Fulgrim, he witnesses like this orgy of sorts, and he's like wait, and he lets the aliens do it. They're these hideous serpentine things, and then he has everyone bolted them down. But strangely enough, he takes a sword. He develops quite a bond with this sword. The sword whispers to him, and the sword was possessed, and eventually it possesses him. And so now there's a demon in charge of the Legion, and no one can really it wasn't even their place to question him. Yeah, the idea of questioning him never comes up. And so basically the Emperor's Children, their contribution to the Siege of Terra is just going and ransacking cities across the planet. They're not committed to the fight. Full Legion is basically out of action here because they can't even control themselves. They're so obsessed with decadence, debauchery. They have become subsumed by Slanesh. I think there's a book. It's just called Fulgrim. It's the best in the Horus Heresy. It details this, and the climax is it's on stage. They have the noise marines just blasting people in the crowd, and there's demons dancing around, and the noise marines slice them, and the demons. It's crazy. The funniest part about that book is there's this sculptor, and he was locking himself away in his room because he wanted to make a sculpture for the Emperor, and he comes out after all this craziness happens, and he's like, "Look at this! Look at the Emperor!" And Fulgrim is like, kill him. But I like it. So the Siege of Terra. Now, I'm going to talk about the greatest controversy in Warhammer. Or probably the dumbest controversy in Warhammer. This was engineered by Games Workshop, and it happens like, okay, so from the rule set, rule edition 1 all the way to 7. Okay, we're talking about 1989, like 2016. The deal was the Emperor saw that Horus's flagship was the shield. For whatever reason, Horus wanted to see the final moments of his victory, so he lowered the shield so he could see it better. The Emperor beams aboard with his most trusted warriors, the Adeptus Custodes, to fight Horus. Now that the shields are down, there's a fight, and the controversy comes here. Horus is supposed to strike the Emperor down, go for the finishing blow, and then realize that he was not only striking down his father, but striking down humanity's only real hope of being human. Like, he saw the freaks that were aligned with him, and that was no sort of humanity that he actually wanted to be behind. I like it because it shows that even in his final moment, Horus had a stroke of mercy or humanity. And it makes it so much more meaningful, I think, than what happened in 8th edition, which is the Emperor just stabbed him a lot and killed him. I mean, it was more complex than that. But the Emperor, in either take, uses all of his psychic might to just like force lightning Horus, killing Horus outright. There's little to be salvaged from Horus besides his genetic material, his armor. The Emperor, however, is also mortally wounded, not only by Horus, but by just the amount of exhortation required to cook someone like this. And he is interned within the Golden Throne. Now we are reaching Warhammer 40,000. This is it. As soon as the Emperor enters the Golden Throne, that's when everything starts. It serves two very important purposes. One, it keeps the Emperor on life support. It stops him from passing over to the warp. He's in a vegetative state. Comatose would be putting it lightly. There are many that speculate that his mind is still reeling away, puppeteering things across the Imperium. Even during the time of the Horus heresy, there were miracles, and miracles can manifest sometimes just by invoking the word of the Emperor. But really, I think the most important part of the Golden Throne is the establishment of the Astronomicon. So the warp, as we discussed, it is not on a linear plane at all. That's why people use it to travel. The Astronomicon establishes one central focal point, one point of linear significance throughout the entire warp, so that mankind can continue to travel and develop unfettered by being spread out amongst the stars. I mean, there's trillions of worlds at this point. I know last episode we went from one world to 2 worlds, but now the worlds are trillions beyond counting. They've just taken so many that there's the Imperial census I think it would be harder to count every member of the Imperium that would be to kill them, personally. And the traitors are sent to the Eye of Terror. The Eye of Terror is a rift in reality where warp space and reality mingle. So you'd have to be crazy to go there. Or have an entire imperium willing to hunt you down and mercilessly kill you because you have at your disposal the ability to do the same to them. The Imperial Army was split between the Imperial Guard and the Imperial Navy so that no one could ever have full control of all those fighting men again. We didn't really talk about the Imperial Army very much, but they were fighting them. You know, you've got to have foot soldiers. The Space Marines were great, but there's only so many of them. And Gilliman, his contribution to the lore would be the Codex Astartes, and basically instead of having legions of around, I mean, I would say a legion. This is really ballpark here, and I'm sure there's a lot of variants, but the legion is typically around 20,000 members. I'm sure after the Horus heresy, that number would be diminished by several degrees, but he took it from legions of around 20,000 and brought them to chapters of 1,000. The chapter is now, the regimented fighting force of the Space Marines, and he did this once again to prevent any one person from taking over so many people at once. So it's key here to realize that the loyalists in the year 40,000 do not have legions, they have chapters, while the traitors have legions, but they do not have chapters. Now, mind you, you've got your Chaos Space Marines, but then you also have Renegades. Renegades are Space Marines that have churned, and if they have churned after the chapter area, then yes, you could have a Chaos Space Marine chapter. I hope you're able to pick up the fine points there. I just, when you're out there in the forums, I want you to know. I really want you to know the difference between a chapter and a legion. You could use them synonymously, sure, but I think there's some hairs to split there. Thanks for sticking with me. We covered the Primarchs and all their glory and what they did. But after reading about the Primarchs, I mean, I think there's more books about the I don't know. I've read so many of them. They were awful. The Primarch project was a complete mistake. Not even with the fact that they got thrown throughout the stars. Each Primarch is just a caricature of the Emperor. It's insanity. It's absolute. It's preposterous. They're all very one dimensional. I mean, you can have smart ones and wise ones, but at the end of the day, they are all imperfect and flawed because of their lack of humanity. Humanity, a person is able to balance their emotions and their experiences with other emotions and experiences, but a Primarch is just far too egotistical. They're almost like cartoon characters. That's really what I would say. I'm glad most of them died, and I wish they would have stayed dead. I really do. I speak as a citizen of the 41st millennium when I say that they were damned from the start.